This is another episode of Standup Comedy, your host and MC, celebrating 40-plus years on the fringe of show business. Stories, interviews, and comedy sets from the famous and not so famous. Here's your host and MC, Scott Edwards.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast. We have another terrific interview for you. This gentleman is a full-time comedy writer, stand-up comedian, for over 2 decades. As a joke writer, he created material for TV and radio shows, including The Tonight Show with Jay Leno, The Howard Stern Show, and Comedy Central, a lot of those roasts you've seen. His material's been seen and heard on CBS, NBC, ABC, HBO, ESPN2, A&E, and MTV. It goes on and on. His jokes were included in a popular book, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Jokes, which I'd like to hear about. He has been writing for people like Howard Stern, Jeff Foxworthy, Jeffrey Rose, Artie Lang, Wayne Brady, Ed Asner, and Gilbert Gottfried. As a comedian, he's performed in clubs across the country and places like the Beacon Theater, the Apollo Theater in New York, the Borgata Event Center in Atlantic City, the Palms Hotel and Casino in Vegas, and the Chicago Theater in Chicago, which, by the way, is beautiful. He's been everywhere. He's very experienced and a very talented entertainer. I think you got that message. Let's welcome Mike Morse.
Oh, all lies, all lies.
Mike, I when I'm going through your references in doing this, I did not realize how long that intro was. So to my audience and to Mike, I'm sorry, but I did want everyone to know.
No, that's fine. Listen, as long as you're talking about me, you can go on as long as you want.
Well, you've just done so much, everything for writing for TV and radio. In fact, you're the co-host of Miserable Men show. What's that?
Well, it's on the Shuli Network. We have podcasts now that we're doing, and it's a whole thing. I do 10 podcasts a week. It's a little crazy. We do one called the Uncle Rico Show. We do one called the BS Show. We do one called the Miserable Men Show. And it's just the basic group is the three of us, myself, Bob Levy, and Shuli, who are also comedians. And each show has a different take to it, but we do that. And then on the Shuli Network, there's also many other shows. It's growing. It's one of those podcast networks that we just started up last year, and it's going really well. So I'm very fortunate to be able to do it. Those two are my friends. We used to do the Miserable Men show on Sirius back in probably about 15 years ago or so, and then we got back together as a goof during the pandemic. We were all in our respective homes and just said, "Oh, let's just start doing a podcast like we did in the old days." And it got some traction, and we started adding, and now here we are.
Well, welcome to the world of podcast. It sounds like you took a similar path of some other entertainers. I actually started my podcast just a few weeks before the pandemic hit, and so I feel a little more pure. But we did have a lot of people jump on the bandwagon, and most of the guys that weren't really into it, the fly-by-nighters, have moved on. But I think it's great that you guys are putting so much terrific content out there. But let's bring it back down to what my favorite art form which is stand-up comedy. You've been a long-time comedian. How did you get started in comedy, and what age?
Well, I was in college, and I was a little older than normal college age because I got kicked out of 2 colleges before the final. 3's a charm. The third
proud moment for your parents. Good.
Oh my God, they were so happy. Oh, more money we get to spend. Terrific. So yeah, I was not prepared emotionally, mature enough to handle being on my own in college for the first college. And I got kicked out of there because I was just partying all the time. And then the second college, it was a commuter college, and I just did not feel like driving there every day. So I took a year off, worked, got a little money under the belt, and then went back and went to William Patterson College in beautiful New Jersey. And and I really liked it and finished up there. So anyway, long story longer, I was doing, I was taking an acting class there, and one of the assignments was to write a monologue for yourself to do. And I did, and it was funny. And the professor said, "Hey, why don't you try that, at a open mic night or something?" And back then comedy was really getting big. It was the late 80s. And so I went to it was like a gong show. It was a talent night. And I won $50. I won. And,
hey, that's awesome.
Yeah. So $50 when you're in college is like, you know how much Iron City beer this will buy? This is like 10 cases. So I went back and started doing it there, and a couple agents, bookers saw me because they used to hang out there, and had me start opening for the comedy nights they were doing all around the state. And that's how it began. It was really I always loved comedy, but I never thought I would have the guts to go up and actually do it. I always liked writing, but performing, I had a lot of stage fright. But luckily in the early days, that's what vodka's for. And, but yeah, and it kind of blossomed from there. It was very serendipitous.
Well, that's interesting because you didn't really, it was almost like homework because the professor recommended it.
Yeah.
And you had a natural ability. You don't remember any of your first early jokes, do you? Anything that comes to mind that was the foundation for your career? I'm trying to think of. Oh gosh! You don't have to strain your brain.
Listen. Maybe I can use them for my next gig. Well, this is what it's a little dark, but it's clean, and it was my. And it's not true. My mother was not a depressed person, but my mother was very depressed. And how I knew is every Thanksgiving, she would just put the turkey's head in the oven. So that was,
But
it was just those kind of one-liners. I just had these thoughts, then once they asked me if I could, I had that 5 minutes, and they said, "Oh, can you do 20?" I'm like, "Sure." So of course, then you have to run home and write 15 more minutes worth of jokes.
Yeah, which isn't easy. So that you kind of threw yourself into the grinder quickly, but
right.
You also find some of us work better under that kind of pressure. But that's and you were still doing open mics and opening sets, so you had time to grow and kind of develop.
Right. Actually, the funny thing back then, again, late 80s, is when the comedy boom happened. So there were no open mics. It was such a new thing. There were not places to go to try stuff out. If you were lucky enough to get booked, because there was not a lot of comedians. Now every third person in America is a comedian. I think that's a fact. But back then there was not a lot. So if they saw somebody who was funny and a little personable, they would say, we'll put you up and you just be the opening act. You do your 10, 15, 20 minutes, whatever it is. So I was really just thrown into the lion's den, and which is the best way to learn, because you have to, you have to really, as they say in the business, bite it to realize how to succeed. And that's what happened. I just did it, and if a joke didn't work, you get that out of there quick, and you come up with a new one. So yeah, it was a very different time. It was so much fun. Comedy back then was like rock and roll was in the mid 60s, where it was new. People had not gone to comedy clubs ever. For the majority of people had never been to a comedy club. So if they go see a comedy show, they're excited, and it's something new and different, and they're not jaded by seeing 100 stand-up specials on TV. And so it was yeah. And I never did the city that much, but I did a lot of road work. And, if you go into a small town in Pennsylvania or Ohio, it was like going into it was like Motley Crue rolling into town, because it was like they'd never seen a comedy show, and it was Tuesday night, and whatever the place is packed, and it was amazing. It was a really good time.
Yeah, and it's so funny because, and I think I'm a lot older than you, but we use the same terminology. I always think of the 80s as a kind of the rock and roll era of stand-up, and we didn't really give the audience a baseline. Where were you going to college, or where was your comedy career started? What state or city?
Well, it was William Patterson was where in New Jersey, North Jersey.
Okay.
Was born and raised Jersey boy, and and it was actually, it's a great place to start that because there was so many. Literally at that point, I would say every other town in New Jersey had a comedy night. So there was Monday nights, Tuesday nights, and you were getting paid. It wasn't like an open mic. Might only be $50, but $50 is great for somebody who's never really done it.
Right. And, a lot of beer money. But what's great about being in New Jersey and kind of getting your feet wet in the industry there is that the opportunity, of course, is to play in New York, and with the Gotham and Catch a Rising Star and some of the clubs, Dangerfields. You know, it's kind of like I had my chain of comedy clubs in Sacramento. A lot of guys like working here because if they could get really good here or try material here, then they could take it to San Francisco or LA or Seattle and really hit the bigger A rooms. I was in A room, but they were bigger, and more people could see you. So did you figure you were turning pro then when you started getting those $50 gigs, or was there a moment where you felt like this could be a career?
Yeah, well, I never not got paid. That's the crazy thing. Is
oh wow, that is unusual.
I did that first gig, won the thing, and got the $50, and then I started doing these small, it was a shot and beer joint in, Kearney, New Jersey. But I'll tell you, you get good really fast when you're trying to tell jokes to a bunch of guys who had worked hard all day, and are not in the mood to laugh. You learn how to, to make it work. Yeah. So I was very fortunate in that way, that and being pro, I never thought about it. It was like, okay, well, I'm doing it, and they keep asking me to do it, so I'll keep doing it.
Right. Well, the reason I used that question was that a lot of the guys I've interviewed, especially if they started in college, they were doing it kind of like to get beer money, and then they got out of college, and the college education they got wasn't really offering the type of job that was as fun or as entertaining or as interesting. Right. You didn't mention your degree. What did you get?
Well, I said I'm not bragging, but it was liberal arts.
So it was stand-up comedy or McDonald's, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I was. It was a 3-tier. It was communications, theater, and art. And so my joke was I could be unemployed in 3 different fields.
Well, but you did kind of prime the pumps with those trainings in college are still basics of entertainment. I mean, it's all about communication, getting your message across, engaging with a group. And so whether you're giving a speech, reading a poem, or doing stand-up comedy, I mean, you are still, in essence, learning some of the basics. So it wasn't truly wasted. It's just there's not a lot of jobs that are looking for liberal arts majors.
Ask my parents that in 1992. Yeah.
So now I know, Mike, that you, as much as you've done stand-up comedy, you really picture yourself or present yourself as a comedy writer. Now, were you prolific at writing in college?
Well, I'd always loved writing, drawing. I like to draw cartoons and writing and drawing funny things. And the first thing I remember actually writing was, I think I was in 6th grade, and we had to do a skit for the class. And I remember writing out the Who's On First routine, Abbott and Costello's Who's On First. But I switched it up so we were different characters, but it was basically that I just stole their whole routine. And I remember writing it longhand and then having them mimeograph, if you remember, at school. make copies so everybody could read it while we were doing the routine. And, and after that, I just always loved writing. And I wrote in college, being in the theater department, I wrote plays and, pursued that for a little while.
Yeah, and those old mimeographs, what's great is you give them to the kids, they take one good whiff, and anything you say is funny.
Exactly. That's funny. So that's how it started, and I always did want to write, and I was writing scripts and theater scripts and other scripts, and the comedy was like, all right, I'll do this, and then as the comedy kind of got a little bigger, it was a juggling act. It was like, do I do that or do I do that? And it eventually kind of melded together where I could do both as much as I wanted, which is great.
Well, I've talked to a few other comedy writers who were also stand-ups, and there was a time, especially in the 80s and 90s, where you could write material. For example, the Howard Stern Show or Jay Leno on the Tonight Show. They had, of course, their one or two main writers that were making probably the big bucks, but everybody could contribute. I mean, for Leno, for example, people would submit, or David Letterman, people would submit jokes, and if it got used on the air, you got $50 or something. Howard
Well,
Stern.
What I did. I wrote for Leno for several years.
Okay.
And and it was. Listen, I'm not bragging again, but it was up to 75 a joke when I was doing it. So.
Wait a minute. We gotta. Yes. The crowd is impressed. Very nice.
It was, and that was also at the time I was working on the Stern Show. I was kind of doing double duty. But the good thing about Leno was you could do it. It was freelance, so I just did it from home. And every morning I'd get up and look at what the big news stories were, and you come up with the monologue jokes. And if he uses them, it's great. If not, you just keep sending them in.
Right. And what the other thing that was great about that setup was that you weren't on the clock. You if you were on the road getting big bucks working a club and you didn't send anything in, nobody noticed. But if you were sitting at home and there was no gigs going on, you could really pound out some stuff, and that was a value to the show, and you could make some side money that way. That's a great way to get started. Now with Wayne Brady and Foxworthy and some of these others, were you writing was it just jokes, or did you ever like write material like long form for anybody?
Yeah, they're all different. A lot of them were specific roast jokes. I was deep into writing roast material because I started working with Lisa Lampanelli, and was one of her main roast writer as well as other stuff she did. And then so that got me into the Friers Club, and so I was writing for a lot of the Friers roasts, both for Lisa and for other people. So they would just say, we need jokes for this guy. So you would just write jokes for that person. And
but that's I'm interrupting a little bit. I apologize,
that's
Mike,
fine.
but that's not like a $75 per joke thing though. That's more of a gig, isn't it? Aren't you getting, hey, we want material on Wayne Brady, you put together a 3 or 5 minute roast, that's a little bit more significant than running a joke for Leno.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. It's every job is different, and some are big jobs, some are little jobs, and the roasts they can be. It was great writing for Lisa because she had such a great character and a point of view for her stand-up that you knew exactly what jokes would work for her, and you could not go too far. It wasn't like, oh, I wonder if she'll be offended by this. Yeah.
Well, I think everybody, well, maybe not everybody listening to this, but most people know that the Friers Club roast were always meant to be adult, and were always you took it as far as necessary to get the laugh and get the big point across about whoever was being roasted. But It is interesting that you were able to not only successfully write short form jokes and material for the various radio and TV celebrities, but being able to write for somebody doing a roast where you're not doing it yourself, you're writing for another person. I've had this conversation with other writers. Do you find it easier or more difficult to write for others versus your own voice?
It depends on the person. If it's a person with a very good stage character, stage presence, then it's easier than someone who's kind of like, I'm just telling jokes. They don't have a point of view necessarily. And most of the bigger, more successful acts do have a very distinct point of view. Like for Foxworthy, I helped work on some material for him for a special, and most of the stuff you're not writing just coming off the top of your head. He'll say, "Here's what I need," and just either punch this up a little bit, or this is the style I need, and this is so it's a lot more direct, and there's more direction, I should say, for that. But while I was doing it, it's very funny because I'm walking around my apartment and I'm coming up with a joke, but you have to do it in the cadence of the person you're writing for. So it's like, you may be. So I'm I'm trying out the jokes to myself, saying, well, now when you see this, so you wanted to write it in his voice, and by doing that, you kind of have to do an impression of him, at least in your head.
Yeah, and that's fascinating because you are having that situation where you're writing for a joke for somebody versus like a Foxworthy bit that where the personality has to be added. So Mike, what you didn't say was you didn't actually answer my question. Is it easier to write for others, or did you find it, interesting and more challenged to write for yourself?
They have different challenges. I like writing for other people. It is a challenge to come up with stuff that you cannot test yourself. If I think of a joke, I'm like, that seems like it'll be funny. I'll try it next time I'm on stage, and if it doesn't work, I toss it out. But I don't want to do that for somebody who has to go do it on stage, and if it bombs, they're like, oh, that guy's a jerk, So you have to really all right, everything has to really hit. Everything has to really hit. There's no wiggle room. Right.
You don't get that trial and error, turning my analogy is turning a lump of coal into a diamond.
Right.
Stand-up comics can do a joke 100 times to get it perfect. When you're writing for somebody else, you got to have to shoot for that diamond right off the hit.
Right. And even then they still have to refine it to make it their own. And that's funny. That separates the wheat from the chaff, or whatever they say, is that people that I write for, they hire me who are not really good comedians. They'll try the joke once and go, oh, that didn't work. I tried it at an open mic, and the 5 people there didn't laugh. Okay. I think it's a good joke. Maybe you try it twice. I'm a little crazy, but
or at least take the time to put it into your words. I mean, that's one of the things. And the reason I asked the question, Mike, is that I've interviewed, over 60 comics at this point, and some of them have said that yes, it's easier to write for somebody else using their comedy voice, but others have said, no, I can write for myself because I know me, I know where I'm coming from, I know my, like you said, cadence, what I'm trying to get my message across. So it's easier for me to write my own material versus somebody else's. So I just found that interesting and wanted to point it out that it sounds like you've been very successful in writing for all these different personalities, and that's both challenging and a talent.
Thank you. And actually, I write for a lot of female comedians, which I don't know.
I didn't want to mention. I didn't want to mention the dress, Mike.
Listen, I'm in touch with my feminine side. But it is. And maybe it's the theater background a little bit, where when you're reading a theater script or you're analyzing it, you have to kind of come from the point of view of the characters. If they're women, you have to understand what their motivation is and what their that stuff is. So maybe that helped. But I mean, I like writing for Everybody.
Oh, you're just so well-rounded, Mike. I'm proud of you. Well, we're fast forwarding a few decades. You've been doing writing for TV, for radio, for performance to use on stage. You've been performing yourself. What has brought you the most success or the most, feel-good moment in your career?
Well, there's a couple. I think starting to work with Lisa was great because, it was just as she was starting to really catch fire. She was getting bigger and bigger, playing bigger and better places. And I started, she asked me to start writing for her. And right after that, she asked me to start opening for her. So all of a sudden I'm doing nice clubs, not necessarily all A clubs. And, and then I'm thrust into this situation where I'm doing the Beacon Theater and the Chicago Theater and the Hard Rock and, 3,000 seater in Orlando. And it's like, oh my God, I'm in showbiz.
What a rude awakening.
Yeah, it's really weird when you're used to playing, the Whale's Tail Bar and Grill in Schenectady on a Friday, and then on Saturday, all of a sudden, okay, I'm at the event center at the Borgata. Oh, okay, this is a little different.
And I'm going to take it one step farther because you were not only writing and performing your material, but you had actually written some of the material that your headliner was using.
Oh yeah. No, that was I did a lot of it, and it was always funny because after my set, I would go sometimes and sit in the crowd, sit in the audience, and I'd be sitting next to somebody, and she'd do one of my jokes, and he'd be going, "Oh, that's hilarious," and and I was like, "Yeah, thanks," but he didn't know I wrote it.
I was going to say, did you nudge him? Hey, I wrote that. Of course
but
not.
Yeah,
yes.
it's a weird experience, seeing that, and but yeah, it was that was she was so great. She was a great person to work for and write for, and we did that for I think it was eight or 9 years.
Wow.
And just traveling all over the country and just I could not have asked for more, and at that time as well, that's when I started working with the Howard Stern show, which I'd listened to him since he had started on radio in New York, and to, first of all, to meet him, to be in the studio was crazy. And then all of a sudden I'm contributing stuff and eventually ended up working there, writing stuff. So those two things were like the career wise were the biggest things.
Yeah. And obviously you're very proud of that, and you should be. Those are great accomplishments, especially, as been pointed out on this podcast before, when you get into stand-up comedy, you're never quite sure where the vehicle, that path will take you. Sometimes it's writing. Sometimes it's performing small shows, big shows, could be television. You could be a showrunner. It could be a little bit of anything. You worked for a long time in a terrific industry. Was there anybody you really looked up to as a writer or performer, or maybe was there somebody that mentored you?
I was very fortunate enough to. It's funny, actually, Howard. I interrupted my first thought because this one came in. Is Howard inadvertently taught me how to really edit, because when I was contributing stuff there, I would do song parodies and other stuff, and I would send it in to the office, and usually it was Sal, one of the guys there was my usual connection there, and he would say, just cut to the funny, and it was a really good thing to learn. It's like, get rid of the stuff you don't need. It's all nice and stuff, but when he does something on the air, he wants it to be bang, bang, bang. And I always remember that. It's like, it helps editing anything now.
Right. It kind of an economy of words to get your message across. You don't, on stage, you might be wanting to fill time, but on TV and radio, it is true. It's better to get to the joke. And how about, you must have been working with a lot of writers that had to also help you develop your skills.
Yeah. I mean, it's always, it's funny because it's always a little competitive, as is comedy too. Whenever you're with other comedians, there's a friendship and a competition, and I think that's what makes you better. It's like, that was really funny, but I want to do something funnier. So it's
it challenges you, right? Yeah,
completely. And Yeah, there's a writer, Frank Santopadre, who has written for Mad Magazine. He actually helped me get into Mad Magazine and start working there. And just a very funny guy, very bright, and he's one of the writers that I really looked up to. Is like, he's done it all his life, and he has these amazing credentials and credits, and he's helped me a lot through the years.
Yeah, it's always, I think, helpful and important to run into people that you respect in the industry, that you can, as we mentioned earlier, maybe mentor you or show you a path that, like you said, as a liberal arts major, you might not have seen yourself, right? There is a huge difference. Right. Well, it's funny, but it's true. There's a big difference between writing poetry or writing a play versus stand-up comedy or material for radio and TV. So I was just acknowledging you were able to bridge that gap, from education to entertainment.
Right. And it's, it is important. And now when I'm doing shows, sometimes it'll be, 90% of the time there'll be younger people on the show because I'm old as hell. But, and it's funny to see the ones who understand that they can take not advice, because I wouldn't give it unless it was asked, but they can really learn from watching the seasoned comics. Some of them think they know everything already, and I understand that. But sometimes they'll start picking your brain. Well, what about this? What about this? It's like, okay, yeah, because it's like asking a war veteran, how do you survive, the next attack?
Yeah, it's so true. In fact, I recently wrote a book on how to be a stand-up comic called 20 Questions Asked and Answered About Being a Comic. And one of them is it's important to watch other acts, not to steal material or borrow a patter, but to understand that interaction between the performer and the audience, which is so key.
Oh, I always do. If I can, if I don't have to leave, or if I try to watch the entire show, because you can learn from what they do right. You can learn what they do wrong.
Oh yeah, it goes both ways for sure.
Yeah. You'll see somebody, they'll get in the jam and they can get out of the jam. You're like, oh, that's brilliant the way they work their way out of that, and now everybody's laughing again. On the other hand, they'll see somebody falter and they'll just destroy themselves on stage. You're like, okay, I'm not going to do that. That's a good lesson too.
Kind of like the Peter Sellers movie, Ride That Bomb All the Way Down.
I remember I was out in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania many years ago, and I love Pennsylvania. Was always like one of my favorite places to play the smaller jobs, because everybody was just so into it. The crowds were so excited and fun. And we're doing it at Harrisburg, and the opening act was a guy from New York City, and I don't think had ever been out of New York City. And he starts doing jokes about subways and bodegas, and they have no idea what he's talking about. And he's like so upset that they're not getting his jokes. And finally, he just said a few expletives and threw the mic down and left. I was like, wow.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. He will not make it outside of Greenwich Village. Yeah. I mean, that's like, he's not getting past the Lincoln Tunnel.
That goes straight to one of the rules of any sort of entertainment or speaking, and that is know the room. Right.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
One of the gifts of stand-up comedy, and the professionals know this, you have to be able to adapt, because your Wednesday night audience of 30 is going to be different than your half a room drunk on Friday late show versus your Saturday 8 o'clock sold out show.
Right. 100%. Yeah. And it's funny. And I being a Friar, I've seen, the classic Catskill comics, Stewie Stone and Freddie Roman and all and those guys were, they're jokes. And, there's a lot of what people would call, mainstream material, kind of, old material. But anytime I've ever seen them, everybody in the room is laughing. I mean,
well, that goes to one of my rules. My podcast is based on my 20 years in show business, but it was back in the 80s and 90s. But when I share the material, my theory is proven true over and over, and that is funny is funny. It doesn't matter if it was a joke written in the 50s. If it was funny, and not topical, but, funny, it works today. Anyway, that's my theory.
Right.
But that leads me to my last question, Mike.
I miss you already.
You've been involved in a book called The Complete Idiot's Guide to Jokes. Now, that sounds perfect for me. What can you explain your involvement and what it is?
Gosh, it was many years ago, and I actually pulled a copy because you had mentioned it. And I'm trying to see what year this was. Let's see. This was in 2006, and somebody emailed me saying that they were looking for jokes for this book, and since I do jokes and I'm an idiot, it worked out that I got to contribute. So I sent a bunch in, and I'm not sure exactly how many here. Let me look. I'm going to brag about myself for a minute here. Where am I? It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I think I had 6 jokes of mine in this book, and yeah, I mean, it's nice. It's
somebody else, it wasn't your book. Somebody else published a book of other people's jokes, and you were a contributor, much like you did for TV and radio. So, I mean, it kind of follows your pattern, Mike.
Correct. Although I do have a book out right now.
Oh, well, let's get to the what I was going to bring up last is, what would you like to plug? What's happening in the Mike Morse comedy world?
Funny you should ask. I have a book that I co-wrote with 3 other very funny fellows, Joey Novick, Neil Berliner, and Ronbo Phillips. It's called Ha Ha History. And it's there's 365 jokes, a joke for every day of the year about something that happened in history on that day. And so, I co-wrote it and co-illustrated it. I drew a lot of the cartoons in it. And it's funny, and it is available on Amazon.com.
What are the odds? That's amazing, Mike. What a success. A printed author and on Amazon. Hey, you know what's great? I'm glad I asked you about that because it is a terrific book. How do I know? I recently interviewed your co-author, Neil Berliner, and he sent me a nice autographed copy. And I've been enjoying the jokes, and I did not know that you did some of the illustrations. So you're also a talented artist. That's a great combination.
Oh, well, I don't know about talented, but I work cheap, so I.
Well,
so yeah.
No, I think that's tremendous. And you're still performing, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm going to be at. There's another plug on April 14th and 15th. I'll be at Catch a Rising Star in Princeton, New Jersey.
There you go. And one last thing. Are you still writing and submitting for any shows?
No, I've been so busy, luckily, with these podcasts where it's been very crazy, and we're having a great time doing it. The Uncle Rico Show and the Miserable Men Show. It's all on the Shuley Network. You can find it on YouTube. And it's very time intrusive because we do so many shows, but I get to hang out with those 2 guys who are my friends and virtually. Luckily, I don't have to be in the same room with them, but we have a great time, and all is well right now. That's all I have to say.
Well, that's awesome, Mike. Well, ladies and gentlemen, be sure to check out these podcasts. If you got some time to kill and you like the funny, go find one of these many podcasts that Mike's involved in. But more importantly, go to that unique and hard to find spot, Amazon.com, and research Ha Ha History. It is really a terrific book and some great jokes. I've had the pleasure of reading many of them. I'm still working my way through the year, but a very funny book. So Ha Ha History on Amazon. Be sure and go and pick it up. Hey, Mike, it's been such a pleasure having you on the podcast. You've had a great story, unique situation as a comedy writer and performer, and I really appreciate you sharing some of your knowledge and experience in the business.
Thank you, sir. It was a pleasure. It was a great listen. Who doesn't love talking about themselves? And I got to do it for 45 minutes. Come on.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you to Mike for joining us. As customary with my podcast, it's been a great interview with Mike Morse, but let's hear just a short bit of his stand-up comedy. Here you go.
That's not easy. She didn't want any drugs. Did you take the epidural? Yeah, see, my wife didn't want any drugs for the delivery, which is ironic because she insisted on them for the conception. So there we are, after 17 hours, there the baby comes out, Dr. Wang turns to me, hands me a pair of scissors. What was awkward because I didn't get him anything. Strange time for Secret Santa. He says, Mr. Morse, would you like to cut the cord? I was like, no, that's your job, all right? You know, there's a reason you went to medical school and I got 320 on my SATs. God wants me to perform surgery. I can't get the little plastic funny bone out of the operation van. I figured my wife would get me out. Did you cut the cord? You did? Yeah, there you go. I didn't want to do it. I figured my wife would get me out of it. She wanted me to do it. This is the same bitch who doesn't trust me to carve the Thanksgiving turkey, okay? So I take the pair of scissors, and I don't like all that mess. I just turn my head and I start chopping. Yeah, it didn't turn out well. Let's just say Dr. Wang is now Jewish. Could have been worse. Another inch in, he would have been Irish. So that's... Kids, I have a boy. It's the cutest thing. He's learning to walk. It's the cutest thing because, like, he works his way up and tries to balance. He takes 2 or 3 steps and he falls over. He's 18 years old, but I think he's retarded. Yeah. He drinks. He's learning to walk and he's learning to talk, and he loves the Teletubbies. Who knows what the Teletubbies are? Clap your hands, you know. Right, see, all the moms in the game, man. Right. If you don't know what a Teletubby is, it's this PBS show. It has these multicolored scrotum-shaped creatures jumping around. And they have weird names. Call them out if you know the names. You see the moms in the game, man. Did you notice that again? That's right, I didn't know these names, weird names. I come home from a road trip, a little boy crawls up, Tinky Winky, Mama, Dipsy Paul. Like, what the hell language is my wife teaching this kid? Was she banging the Chinese food delivery boy? What's going on here? This kid says beef and broccoli, somebody's getting their ass kicked, right?
Well, you can see he's got a great sense of humor and not only a terrific comedy writer, but he can perform as well. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did doing it. Stay tuned next Sunday, another great show. Thanks for listening. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC. For information on the show, merchandise, and our sponsors, or to send comments to Scott, visit our website at www.standupyourhostandmc.com. Look for more episodes soon and enjoy the world of stand-up comedy. Visit a comedy showroom near you.